It's a positive commandment to believe that there is a God in existence. It says in Shmot, I am Hashem your God. And he, be he blessed and exalted, brought all the existing entities into being, and all the worlds by his power and blessed wish. It is he who watches over everything. This is the foundation of our faith, and whoever does not believe this denies the very main principle, the one and only God. And he has no share or right among the Jewish people. We are duty bound to be ready to give our life and our might and main for this belief. The main thing is to fix firmly in one's heart and soul that this is the truth and nothing other than this is possible. Okay, so I think we know that. I can continue. Damon, number 2. It's actually the first one in this book, but okay. It's a positive commandment to know the unity of the blessed God and believe with complete faith that he is one without any partner or associate. In the Shema, which is also quoted in Devarim, says, Hear, O Israel, Hashem our God, Hashem is one. This is the main principle of our faith. After the first knowledge that there is a God in existence, it is necessary to believe with complete faith that he is simply, utterly one in the utmost degree of unity. He is not a physical being. No concept about a physical being can apply to him. Nothing can affect a physical being. Nothing that can affect a physical being can affect him. There is none second like to him. And without him, there is no God. We are duty bound to hear this belief in mind at every occasion and moment, both man and woman. Okay, and the last one here, just to finish it off, there's 3 and the same theme. It is a positive commandment to love the blessed God with all one's heart, spirit, and might. And in Devarim it says, and you should love Hashem your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And that obviously comes from the Shema. This is the way towards love for him. When we will meditate on his activities until we comprehend him to the extent of our ability, the heart will become inflamed with the love for him. This is the love that is essential for us. So let a person set his entire thought on affection for the blessed God. A man cannot love the Holy One, blessed be he, except through knowledge by comprehending him. Through this knowledge, the affection comes in. If it is little, then a little. If it is much, then much. Therefore, a person needs to sit himself solely to understand and grow wise through the fields of wisdom and comprehension that convey the glory of his Maker, to the extent of the ability that a person has to understand and realize. This is among the commandments that a person has as a duty to observe at every occasion and every moment. Included in this mitzvah is to bring human beings closer to him, to service and worship, and to make him beloved by his human beings. As Abraham, our father, said, peace abide with him. As scripture states, and this is in Bereshit, and the souls that they had formed in Haran. For this reason, the Holy One, blessed be he, is called him by his friend, as it says, Abraham, my friend. Okay, I think that was pretty complicated even for me. But basically, Hashem is one, there's only one. And we need, he looks after us, looks over us. And he's basically our Father in heaven, as they say. Anyone else want to add to that?
No, I concur.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Good.
Right, Kevin, thanks.
I'm going to just quickly say
I hope that makes sense what I read. Actually, the last one was a bit complicated, but it's...
It did make sense, really. You read it well. Honestly, you did read it well.
Okay, so I'll see the next couple of ones, and if they start getting a bit too technical, then I'll go into the Shabbos one. I'll keep on going with this one for a while, and we'll see how it goes.
All right.
Cool, okay.
All right, great. You did a good job. Kevin.
Yeah. That's what I'm waiting for.
Sorry, Gavin.
No, it's fine.
Just hang on. Take it away, sir.
Okay, here we go. If one puts out his processed straw or whole straw into the public domain to be converted into manure, and another person is damaged by them, the owner of the straw is liable to pay for his damage. And whoever is the first to take the straw acquires it. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, all those who create hazards in the public domain and cause damage are liable to pay. Whoever is the first to take the hazardous objects acquires them. If one turns over dung in the public domain and another person is damaged by it, he, the one who turned it over, is liable to pay for his damage.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we already touched on the subject before about if one turns over dung in the public domain and another person is damaged by it, he, the one who was turning it over, is liable to pay for his damage. That was an issue that was discussed last daf, using the Mishnah on this particular daf. Okay, so we're now going to concentrate on the first part. So what is this thing about processed straw and whole straw, and why distinguish between the two? That's the first question I want to ask you guys. And then the second question, well, it's a rhetorical question. You wouldn't know the answer unless you've done Chazorah. And then the public domain, into the public domain to be converted into manure. So I wanted to ask you guys, first things first, is did anybody have a chance to do Chazorah that could possibly answer that question?
On Thursday, you're talking about?
Anytime, if you guys have done some prep.
What's this?
Okay, just say the question again slowly.
All right, so if you read the Mishnah, it said, if one puts out his processed straw or whole straw into the public domain to be converted to manure, and another person is damaged by them, the owner of the straw is liable to pay for the damage. How many people here have done preparatory learning? If you haven't, I know you put it. Okay.
I listened to it at least.
Okay, so
I did it a week ago when you sent, but why? Yeah.
No, it's fine. I'm not here to penalize anybody. Arthur, what is this concept of processed straw and raw straw?
Okay, so so raw straw. I actually don't know I don't know what about the process. I mean, there are two different types. One is raw, and one is the one that's laid down, and the one that is stepped on.
All right, so the reason I want to ask you questions is I want to see if you understood what you learned. Why do you put it in the public domain? What are the two types of straw?
Oh, there. Okay. You put it in the public domain so that it can actually be mulched down and get ready for preparation for your garden.
Okay, and how is it mulched down?
Animals and people stepping over it.
Excellent. So what we learn is that if you've probably got two little horses, and that the public has got hundreds of horses going over it, the likelihood of it is the amount of traffic that it's got, so to speak, will break up the constituency of the actual hard straw to the extent that it becomes mush, especially during the rainy season. So that being the case, what they want to do here is take unusable straw. And when we say unusable, there's when it's processed somewhat and the chemicals break it down, it's used for two things. It's used for manure if you let it break down completely. But if you don't let it break down completely, it's actually used, and it's not manure. When the Gemara or the Mishnah says here, into the public domain to be converted into manure. Manure, as we understand it today, are waste products of an animal which are very rich in nitrates, etc., that help with growth of plant life and soil development, etc., for your alkaline and acidity base. But in those days, you could stick banana peels and all sorts of fruit and vegetables that start to decompose to get into that particular state. Straw was one of them. So if it decomposed not to a full state, it would be used for animal fodder. So animal fodder means it's going to start to get rich in nutrients, whereas dry straw isn't as rich in nutrients for the animal. So when they use the term manure, if you let it process completely, in other words, completely biochemically break down, it can be used to aid soil composition. And if you don't let it break down completely, it's used for animal feed. And then the animals do their little job, and then it's great for the soil. Okay.
It's probably good for the animal to grow as well, because it's got more nutrients inside them.
Correct. So what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel has got a slightly different opinion to Rav in this case. Let's listen to his words very carefully. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, and in fact, I'm going to share my screen just for this. It's easier. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, all those who create hazards in the public domain and cause damage are liable to pay, and whoever is the first to take the hazardous objects acquires them. So now what's happening is that the rabbis wanted your hazards that you create in the public domain to be ownerless. Why do they want them to be ownerless? Because if everybody is taking out their straw to be almost animal traffic, to be broken down by the pressure of animals' footing in various other things to deteriorate, the one opinion is fine. You want that because you want the result of the improvements. In other words, the straw is now going to become useful. And since it has improved, that's why you've stuck it in the public domain for a purpose. You haven't dumped your stuff there. What you've done is you've taken your stuff and you've put it outside in order to convert it into manure or horse fodder or whatever the case may be. So therefore, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis all say that it now becomes ownerless. So your punishment for putting it in the public domain without permission means in that particular case, they're now rendered ownerless. So whoever wants to come and take them can take them. And that is used to discourage you to do so, because now the only reason you put in the street is because that object has value for you when it converts into manure. And if you know anybody's got first dibs and can take it, then you're not going to put it in the public domain and create a hazard. Does that make sense, guys? That's why the rabbis wanted to declare those objects ownerless, and whoever's the first to take the hazardous objects acquires them. Make sense?
Yep.
Fine.
Yeah.
Now, what's going to happen, Kevin, is it's going to get a little bit more complicated. Because if you have a look, Rabbi Gamliel turns around and says, well, you're responsible for the damage it causes. In fact, the whole Gemara says that, the whole Mishnah. You're responsible for the damage. Now, Rav says for a hazard in the public domain, are you liable, guys, if it's ownerless?
No, you're not liable.
And what does Shmuel says?
He says
you are liable.
Correct. Whether it's ownerless or it is yours, irrespective, you're liable for your hazard in the public domain. Rav said if it's ownerless, you're not liable for damage it causes in the public domain. If you do own it, you're liable under the case of shor, meaning because it's your property. It's the same as one's ox that damages. So in that particular case, you can't have it both ways. If Rav wants to say that it's ownerless, it means he can't hold somebody liable for that damage in the public domain. So either he's got to say that it is the person's straw, and if it damaged in the public domain, that person is responsible. Or if he declares it ownerless, not the owner of the straw, but the rabbis, in order to penalize this person so people will confiscate his goods, then Rav wouldn't, it would be difficult to see how Rav could make him responsible for the liability aspect. Does that make sense? It hasn't been addressed in this Mishnah, but it's something I want to discuss with Rabbi Cohen.
Damon?
Yes?
The word hazard implies danger. The straw is not a danger. That's why it's interesting why they call straw
I'll tell you why.
hazardous. You know what I mean?
No,
it's not a dangerous.
I tell you why it's a danger. So I think Kevin brought up a good point. The Gemara discerns between two different types of straw. When it starts to get into the process, when it's not slippery and it's not damaging, then it's deemed as less of a hazard than when it's slippery. And I think Kevin's point is well founded. It really, really is well founded. And in fact, to prove to Kevin's point would be note 1 on Daf 30b1. Just thought I'd let you know, Kevin. So you're correct. All right. So as far as that's concerned, these are some of the issues that we're dealing with. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel seems to hold both are true. Number one, as the Mishnah generally says, that if your hazard is in the public domain, in other words, Kevin, you leave something in the public domain and it causes any damage whatsoever, then they say in this particular case in the Mishnah that you're liable. So I want to know from Rabbi Cohen, if Rav makes it ownerless, like the other rabbis, would he hold one responsible for the liability? Because he generally doesn't if it's ownerless. Why are they making it ownerless? Because ownerless means you can come and take it from the owner, and that's his punishment for creating a hazard in the public domain. Okay, that's number one. Number two, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is turning around and saying, hang on, you're responsible if it causes damage, but it's ownerless in the fact that the first to acquire it gets it. So not only are you penalized for liability, but you also now lose your rights to it if somebody takes it first. Why is this done? As an absolute deterrent for you doing it in the public domain. Now, there is a concept that's going to go into this particular Mishnah as we're going to go forward is, well, do you have permission to do it or you don't have permission? How is it that suddenly everybody did it? So then it's going to go to that principle of what we call the septic tank in the winter season. What is that concept, guys, of the septic tank in the winter season?
Everyone can ask.
Try.
Yeah.
Okay, Gavin, you're going to go first.
Go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
Kevin,
Go
give it a
ahead,
bash.
So the winter season, it was usually the rainy season, the Mediterranean climates.
Correct.
So it was allowed to empty out the waste because it would get washed away, but not in summer where it would cause disease, like obviously in the medieval times, like the Black Death.
Perfect.
So it would be allowed.
Perfect. That's exactly it. So what we're saying is here is that this might be the season, and even if it's allowed, why is it the season? It's not just the animal walking on it that would create a compost situation. It's also the water on it, the constant water and trampling that would create that chemical disintegration where it starts to rot and be crushed. So therefore, what the Gemara is going to suggest is that there are allowances. Nobody just woke up one day and thought they'd stick a hazard in the domain. There's a season where, for example, the hay or the straw grows and is cut. It doesn't grow all year long. And then you have to feed your animals and you have to process it. So the one sort of thought of the Mishnah is when this becomes, straw season or manure season, that everybody's taking it into the domain at different times and they're allowed to take it in the public domain. So why are you liable? For exactly that reason that Kevin discussed now, that even if, for example, Egoli Gas, as Rabbi Cohen said, had permission to lay pipes on the roads down to Durban, they had permission from the municipality and the government. It doesn't give them permission to damage your car. It's the same thing with the septic tanks. Even though it's the season to open your septic tanks because the rain will wash it away, and it makes a lot of sense. In that particular case, it still doesn't give you the right to have your septic tank damage somebody else's clothing or goods or utensils, etc. So under that premise, you might have permission to be there. You might have permission to undertake the activity, but you do not have permission to damage.
Can I just add something? Sorry,
yes, sure.
Just wanted to make more of a comment. I would think that during this particular season with the hay, that if everyone's doing it, then the public would be aware of it and they shouldn't be damaging themselves. I mean, you've got to be an absolute idiot to do that.
Okay, so you've got a good question, and that's why we had to be taught this. Because in the Mishnah before, a woman that slipped on somebody's sewage, apart from the fact that she'd vomit and hang herself from the mere smell, and that dress is rendered unusable, she might have turned around and said, well, you owe me for the dress. And the guy might have turned around to her and said, you moron of a woman. Everybody's emptying their septic tanks. And that's why there's the chidush. The Gemara comes to say, even though you've got the right to do it, you don't have the right to damage people. And based on the fact that everybody's opening their septic tanks, you've got to use your brains here. You've got to make sure that you watch where you walk, just generally, but also you watch when you spill it. In other words, we're looking at a society here which tries to look after each other and not use the fact that everybody's doing it as an excuse. Take South Africa. Everybody's corrupt and stealing, but when you get to Shemaim, you're not going to say, well, everybody else did it. That's cool. There's no excuse for it just because everybody else is doing it.
No, they are going to say it. They're just not going to get away with it.
Correct. Very nice.
Damon.
Yeah.
It could also be a comment. If these people had livestock, and surely they could designate a piece of patch in their own private domain to let it process it, to put it in public domain and endangering and making themselves possibly liable for damages. Why didn't they do that?
Completely correct. I think that's what they were actually trying to encourage. That in many cases,
this guy doesn't have 1,000 horses.
Yeah. So let's take two examples. Let's take Kevin's and let's take Gavin's. In Kevin's case, what they should have done is put the straw and the manure in the stables at night to make sure that the animals' footprints or whatever, or that general weight might have turned. Look, Kevin, it might have been a slower process. When you've got animals galloping and you've got thousands of cars, say you want to crush something, and I put on the M1 South something where there's going to be thousands of cars within a given day instead of my one or two cars reversing backwards and forwards. It'll do the job a lot quicker. So what we learn in this Gemara is you only have 30 days to do this, eh? Those that say that there is permission says that there's a time limit of 30 days. Okay, and also your animals are working during the day. Your animals can't sit there just crushing things. They're working, and at night they're sleeping. Secondly, if you want them to process the straw, you're not going to get that sort of foot traffic. That's something to bear in mind. All right. So the 30-day permission means that, exactly as you said, Gavin, even you got 30 days, you still got to put it in a way that creates the least amount of hazard. Let's get started into the actual Gemara of exploitation. I hope this has been a nice introduction to the Mishnah to some extent. All right. The Mishnah taught that one who puts straw in the public domain is liable for any resulting damage. The Gemara identifies a Tana who possibly disagrees with this. Shall we say our Mishnah is in a disagreement with Rabbi Yehuda? For it says, it was taught in a brasa, Rabbi Yehuda says, in the season when manure is put out. Okay? So what do we mean in the season where where manure is put out? What we're saying is that there's certain times of the year when it was customary to fertilize the fields. So one of the case of it is, if you want to look at a commentary, guys, Tosfot makes a commentary in Bava Kamma 118b for your references. So farmers cleared away compost matter, for example, straw and excrement, out of the barns and deposited it into the street for the reasons given below. Why did they do it at that time? Because that was the rainy season. So what would you do is you'd open up your septic tanks, clean out the barn, the manure after months. That must have smelled great. So that's why they used the rainy season. And straw, the animal had been lying on it. It must have smelled very much like horse sweat for 6 months. So I can understand why you would want to let it get out the barn and deteriorate and turn into manure. So it seems that it was customary to do this in a certain season. And in fact, the Torah's Chaim, to this commentary on Bava Kamma and the Rashash and Rashi, said you can leave it there for up to 30 days. All right? Why? Because it says in the Gemara, a person may put his manure matter out in the public domain, and he may heap it there for an entire 30 days, so that it will be well crushed by the feet of the people and the animals passing over it. Okay, so on this particular condition, how do I put it? Okay, on this particular condition, so you've got a mixture of a bit of rain, a bit of animal traffic, a bit of human traffic. Joshua gave the Israelites possession of the land. So what is it talking about here? It's talking about that there were certain halachas. Yeshua allocated Eretz Israel to the Jewish people, and he issued a number of laws concerning the use of land. So, guys, if you want to find out those laws, you need to go to the 80th daf. It's on section Bet, and the 81st daf on section Aleph. And there it will list for you the laws that the Gemara gives, that Joshua gave with regards to agricultural periods. 30 days you can do this, 20 days you can do that, etc., etc. I haven't gone through all of them, but we're going to unpack this piece by piece. So Rabbi Yehuda allows one to leave manure matter in the public domain. So it seems that he wouldn't hold the owner liable if it causes damage. Why? Why wouldn't he hold the owner liable if it causes damage, according to Rabbi Yehuda? It would seem so far.
He would say that it's ownerless.
No, he would say there's permission to be there. In other words, if I'm saying that the law is that it's for 30 days you can stick there, you can say, well, if everybody's doing it as Gavin said it, which makes a lot of sense, well, how do you hold somebody liable? Everybody's doing it. Makes sense what you were saying, Gav.
So far,
so far it seems like a good point. Hence, our Mishnah, which rules in a similar case that the owner is liable, is incompatible with the view of Rav Yehuda. So what is it saying here is that whoever's the Tana Kamma of our Mishnah, now Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is somebody that discusses the Mishnah at a certain point. I don't know if he's the Tana Kamma of the whole Mishnah, because the Tana Kamma generally means it's an anonymous opinion, and then we work out who it is according to trends and things like that of what they would usually say in evidence. So I think Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel might be, but then it would generally not be an anonymous opinion. But whatever it is, it's saying, look, it seems that Rav Yehuda would not agree with it. Why? Because if you got permission to be there for 30 days, why are you liable? Now that's inconsistent, obviously, with the Tana Kamma of the Mishnah. Why is it inconsistent? Because the Tana Kamma of the Mishnah turns around and says, well, you are liable. Whether you have permission to be there or not, it's like your septic tanks. You have permission to empty it out, but if it damages, you're liable. If the road works are doing work on the road and the government gives them permission, it's still liable if it damages your car. Does that make sense? That's the classical explanation. That's what Rabbi Cohen used as an example. So these are the two opinions about responsibility, whether if you have permission or not. Now, the Gemara responds, you can say that our Mishnah is consistent even with the view of Rav Yehuda. Why? Rav Yehuda agrees that one causes damage by putting manure into the public domain. He pays for what he damaged. Although Rabbi Yehuda allows one to put manure in the public domain, he maintains that one who does so is liable if it causes damage. This is the Gemara's response. So it means it's seeming that our Mishnah could be consistent with Rav Yehuda, and according to this approach, the Mishnah's ruling, whoever's the first to take it, acquires it, applies only after damage is done. Since Rav Yehuda allows one to put straw in the street, it is unlikely that the sages permit people to take it except for after the damage is done. So now, Gavin, it's talking about something slightly different. It's saying, listen, if you have permission to put it in the street, Rav Yehuda is saying that you can't just make it ownerless and then make sure that the first to come can take your stuff. Because if you got 30 days to put it in the street, why is anybody entitled to take your stuff? You didn't do it without permission. So that's what the Gemara is saying. It's saying, listen, he's arguing over a slightly different issue. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Kevin? So in other words, he's saying, the Gemara is saying, listen, he agrees with the Gemara that if you put that manure out into the public domain and it causes damage, you're liable. Why? Because it's not ownerless. And since it's not ownerless, because you have permission, the rabbis can't render it ownerless because you put it out for a reason. You've got permission, but then nobody else can take it because it's ownerless. You can't have it both ways. You can't make somebody liable and then say to them, well, they lose rights to it. That's what the Gemara is saying so far on Rabbi Yehuda. Any questions, guys? It should be self-explanatory. Yeah?
So they can have it there for a limited period. He can put the manure out in the public domain for a limited time period.
Yes, but Rabbi Yehuda is saying, according to the second view of Rabbi Yehuda, that there's no liability, like the first view wanted to say, because it was a proposition and said, Rabbi Yehuda says you're not liable, and the explanation of the Gemara was saying actually there is liability, but because you own it and you've got permission to be there, so nobody can take your ownership away, but therefore you're still liable if it damages, even if you've got permission to be there, just like when you open up your septic tanks. But then nobody can just take it and say, well, the rabbis punished you and said it's ownerless now because they gave you permission for 30 days. So not first come, first serve on your stuff. Right, let's just go on a second. So the Gemara questions this definition of Rav Yehuda's view. But we have learned in a Mishnah, okay, and the Mishnah that I'm talking about, guys, is in 62b. We haven't learned this in the Mishnah. They're talking about Talmud Chachamim that knew these Mishnahs backwards. Okay? But we did discuss this, by the way, guys. We discussed this while I was in a Mamsum Toti. Rav Yehuda said in the case of a Chanukah lamp left in the street, one is not liable to pay for damage resulting from it because it is placed there with permission. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but it said if a camel laden with flax was passing through the public domain and its flax protruded into a shop and set it ablaze by the lamp of the shopkeeper and it set fire to a mansion, the owner of the camel is liable. We learned this, guys. If the shopkeeper placed his lamp outside, the shopkeeper is liable. Rav Yehuda said in the case of a Chanukah lamp, the shopkeeper is not liable. So what it was saying there is as follows. When we learned this when I was in the Mamsum Toti, we're saying, like, listen, you doing shopping, your animal has no right, there's no electricity, guys. The guy's got his shop open at night. He's got lamps there to light up his shop, and you bring in your animal there, and this thing is overburdened with flammable material, and he sets the shop alight, or a mansion alight. You're liable in that case. Now, if the shopkeeper puts a flame outside, Gavin, the shopkeeper is liable. Why is the shopkeeper liable if you set alight a mansion because the camel got set alight? Is because you're putting a hazard in the public domain. It's fine that an animal is not entitled to come to the shop and he's lighting his shop. He's got no right to put his fire in the public domain. That we learned, right? But Rav Yehuda permits this. Why does he permit this? During the time of Chanukah. Because we're saying it was the custom to do so. And that's why he doesn't hold the shopkeeper liable, because the shopkeeper is entitled to, during the time of Chanukah, have his lights outside. So he's saying maybe this brisa is saying that it's Rav Yehuda would not hold the owner of the manure liable in this particular case. Why? If it was a custom for everybody to take it outside, just like in the case of Chanukah, and said he wasn't liable because that's a custom, why would he make anybody liable in this case when it was a custom to stick your straw outside for 30 days? Am I making sense? So it was saying maybe Rav Yehuda doesn't hold the person liable. Maybe that interpretation that he did, and just say, listen, he is liable because it's his goods, but nobody can take his stuff because it's ownerless as a penalty to him because he's got permission to be there. But if he damages, he's liable. So this is saying he's not liable. Why? Because if you take that example of Chanukah, they had the permission to put their Chanukah lights outside during 8 days. So here they've got permission to put their manure outside for 8 days. So let's read on. So in other words, what we're saying is, in the case of the Chanukah lamp left in the street, one is not liable to pay for damages resulting from it. Why? Because it is placed there with permission. In other words, surely Rav Yehuda means that he is not liable because he put the lamp in the street with the permission of the court. In other words, he's permitted to do so by law. So the Mishnah proves that Rav Yehuda does not hold this Mishnah liable for damages resulting from an act permitted by law. So therefore we're saying if he had the rights to stick his manure out for 30 days, and that was the custom. We can see Rav Yehuda doesn't hold him liable if the law allows him to do so, because everybody's doing it. So the Gemara answers. What does the Gemara answer? No. Rav Yehuda means that the owner of the lamp is not liable because he had permission to put the lamp in the street for the sake of a mitzvah. Okay? Obviously, because it's the festival of Chanukah, and it's a mitzvah to kindle a light on each of the 8 nights of Chanukah. So the light has to be in a position where it can be seen. That's part of the mitzvah. And he basically placed it outside the shop to fulfill the mitzvah that passers-by can see. That's according to Rashi and Tosfot and Gemara Shabbos 21b. And in the Shulchan Aruch, that's the law. In page 671. So, accordingly, what we're saying is it's a different case here. That Rav Yehuda would say that the person is liable. Why? For putting out the manure. Because Rav Yehuda said in the case of Chanukah lamp, he is not liable because it is a place where he has permission that was granted for the sake of a mitzvah. So it was the sake of a mitzvah. So sake of a mitzvah is a completely different reason that makes an allowance. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, but isn't it a mitzvah to toil the land as well? So you want to get the best way of doing it, and the best way is to get the manure because it's going to make the ground and the land grow much better.
Yeah, but that's what you call a detached law, meaning
not direct.
It's not direct. Here we've got a direct mitzvah to publicize the mitzvah outside and light the Chanukah for 8 days every Jew. Therefore, it's a mitzvah. There's a difference between a mitzvah and civil law. So a mitzvah takes precedence because it's Hashem's law. It's D'oraisa. So in this case, you could argue that having good manure feeds the animals, etc., but it's an extrapolated, nice thing to do. But it doesn't mean, by the way, you could ever do a mitzvah by damaging somebody. You can't steal R1 million and give it to tzedakah. You can't damage somebody with your product in the public domain in order to try and feed your animals. No mitzvah should be done while doing an aveira. Okay, so let's just go through the next part. The Gemara cites a brisa in support of this explanation. It was taught in a brisa. Rav Yehuda says, in the case of Chanukah lamp, he is not... Okay, just hang on a sec. So the Gemara has defended its answer to Rav Yehuda, and he holds one liable in the case of a permissible act. So in other words, what we're saying is if you have a look at the septic tanks, where you have permission to open up your septic tanks in winter in Israel because it's rainy, as Kevin said, or you have permission for 30 days to bring your manure out. You might have permission to have it in the street, but you don't have permission to damage anybody. So come here the following brisa. With regards to all those sages who said, you have permission to create hazards in the public domain. In other words, the law is that if they cause damage, they are liable to pay. But Rav Yehuda says they are not liable to pay. In this brisa, Rav Yehuda rules explicitly that one is not liable for damage resulting from an act permitted by law. Hence, our Mishnah is not consistent with the view of Rav Yehuda. So let me explain to you what this means. Rav Yehuda, by the way, the septic tank law, we learned it on the 6th daf, guys. I don't know if you remember in Aleph. So the Gemara now proves consistently and conclusively that Rav Yehuda does not hold one accountable for damages resulting from a permitted act, because the original difficulty was reinstated. So it was saying, how did it get reinstated? Quickly, we got a few minutes. We were saying very quickly, it said in Chanukah it's a mitzvah, and that's why he's not held liable. In this particular case, it says he's held liable. But then it brings the Gemara from 6a, which says very, very clearly that if you're allowed to do it because it's a permitted act, then he would not hold somebody liable. So Rav Yehuda maintains that it's permitted to put manure in the public domain. exactly like putting your waste from your septic tanks open in winter in the public, and then you're not accountable for doing so. But our Mishnah rules in a similar case that you are accountable. So in other words, Rav Yehuda is saying in the season where manure is put out, so Rav Yehuda is saying something else, right? He's saying now there is maybe a way to, like almost, what do you call it, resolve the brisa. So with regards to all the sages who said that you have permission to create hazards in the public domain, the law is that if they cause damage, they are liable to pay, but Rav Yehuda rules that they're not liable to pay. In this brisa, Rav Yehuda rules explicitly that one is not liable for damage resulting from an act permitted by law. Hence, our Mishnah is not consistent with the view of Rav Yehuda. The Gemara suggests a way in which Rav Yehuda's view and the Mishnah can be reconciled. Quickly, Rav Nachman said, the Mishnah refers to a time of year when it is not the season for putting manure out in the street or opening up your septic tanks, and thus it's consistent with the view of Rav Yehuda, which applies only during this season. So what it's saying quickly, we've got 1 minute, is Rav Yehuda would hold somebody liable if you did it in the season where you're not permitted to put your manure out or your straw out for 30 days, or in the summer season when you're not allowed to open your septic tanks. But when you are allowed, he disagrees with the Mishnah, the Tana Kamma of the Mishnah, and says that you're not liable. Does that make sense? So basically, Rav Ashi is saying, Rav Nachman is saying that you can reconcile it. He agrees with the Mishnah in seasons that are not appropriate, but in seasons where it is appropriate, he disagrees with the Mishnah.